Good morning. My name is Kutay Biberoglu. I'm very excited to be here today alongside a wonderful panel. And would like to thank the Architecture League for having me today. Mario Gooden, who was my instructor at Columbia GSAP. Thank you for having me. Fun fact, this is actually my second time at this event. The first time was a number of years ago, and I was here as a student. So when the league asked me to join again, but as a panelist this time, I tried to tap into that past self to try and remember what kinds of questions I had in my mind and what would be helpful for me to hear from the panelists. And I absolutely failed at that. I just could not remember what kind of question I had in my mind. And it could be because I didn't have any specific questions. I was kind of absorbing all sorts of information and then deciding whether I liked it or not. So I'm not going to assume and rather talk about what I personally know best and what I think is important, which are my personal goals as of 2024. It's a very short list of just 3 goals because Zoe's looking at me and I have only 10, 12 minutes. So I'll quickly go over these. The idea is if you relate to these goals, and I think you probably will because it's a pretty generic list, that I can sprinkle some insight of things that I have seen over the years, ever since I graduated from GSAP. So starting with the first one, adapting to a new country and also finding a way to stay. As I said, I am Turkish. My name is Kutay, that's a Turkish name, born and raised in Turkey, or now we call it Turkey for a few years. We were sick of the Thanksgiving jokes, that's why we changed the name. I was born around that red dot, Ankara, the capital city, and I was there until I was 23. As a child, I didn't really want to be an architect. I probably didn't even know what architecture was really, in depth, at least, but I knew what films were. So I wanted to be a filmmaker. This is me. And I think there's quite an overlap between filmmaking and architecture. There's definitely storytelling aspect to it that's in both. There's space making, creating worlds and lighting and drama. So I kept it as a hobby. Obviously, I didn't choose it as a profession, but I definitely have been doing it ever since this photo was taken on the side in terms of passion projects. This is a short film I made about 2 years ago. If we have any GSAPers here, they might recognize that room. It's one of the rooms in Avery Hall. Sent it to a bunch of festivals just to see how it would do. As a hobby, I also want to be good at it somewhat. It was okay. And I think the point here is, well, hobbies I think are very important. And secondly, I think the hobbies such as this, I like to think translates to some design thinking in my day-to-day profession as well, in terms of design sensibility and communicating ideas. It could be an audience or a client. But then I started architecture school. That's what I chose. I went to Middle East Technical University in Ankara, beautiful faculty. I was very lucky to have studied in that building. It was a 4-year program. At the end of this, I wanted to apply to master's programs, and I wanted to apply to the United States. That felt closest, going back to the goal of trying to adapt to a new environment. I thought that would be easiest. I grew up playing Grand Theft Auto and listening to Eminem and watching Hollywood movies, so I kind of had an idea of what I was getting into, and I was right. A lot of Grand Theft Auto in New York City. As you can imagine, and as you know, architecture school is special in that you meet a lot of people really fast, you work with them in a single environment, and you spend lots and lots of hours. So going back to the goal of trying to adapt, it was a breeze for me because I made a lot of friends on day one, and many of these faces you see are still friends to this day. And it is a cliche of an insight, but it is true. Keep your friends close. You learn from them as much as you learn from your professors, if not more, and keep them for life if you can. The second part of adapting is that's half the battle, right? If you're like me and as an international student, I know the anxiety. I will not dwell on this for too long because I know it doesn't apply to everyone, but I have gone through every single one of these visa processes. It is an anxiety-inducing thing knowing that you kind of find a new home, but you might legally be out if something goes wrong. So during the panel or afterwards, if you are looking for insight, I can provide that. I got my green card only 3 months ago, and I've been, thank you. I've been in the US for 9 years. That's how long it took for me, and I was anxious the entire time until 3 months ago. Finally, I can breathe. Goal number 2, finding the right work atmosphere. Now, this is a list of all of the internships I did, and one thing I did without knowing, inadvertently, I ended up working for a few months at very, very different firms, and that really helped me make an informed decision when it was time to make a more permanent, let's call it, decision for a workplace. For example, let's take the first two, Only If and Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. Only If is a local firm led by Adam Frampton. Some of you might know him. He teaches in the city. Great person, great architect, and I had a wonderful time working at his office. It's a 5 to 6 people firm. SOM, on the other hand, I'm sure you all know, is a huge firm across the globe, has offices everywhere. I was in San Francisco, 200 people over 2 levels. I only got to meet like 15 of them. And you can kind of imagine the vibes are very different. Both has their advantages and disadvantages, and it's almost irrelevant what I think because you have to see for yourselves. I think if you can, absolutely try to choose very different internships so you see and experience yourselves. This was my first day at SOM. They gave me this desk as an intern. This was my first year in the US. I thought I'd made it. Wow. Chill. And then they did chill because they gave me this physical model task that I had to build for 2 months straight of an airport. I like physical models. I don't like building them. If I knew at the time what I know now, I would say, okay, I've done enough of this to my manager or mentor at the time. Can I learn this? I should have spoken up. I did not. If you ever find yourself like me in this photo, do speak up. And if your manager, mentor, they don't listen to you, perhaps that's a good indication of what a good work environment is for you. Now, what is a good work environment? Obviously, it's very personal. This is a very generic list to get the conversation going. Ability to foster creativity. I like autonomy. I think micromanaging is the worst thing that could happen to someone. Mentorship, super important. I think if possible, have at least one, potentially more mentors in your work environment because you should be asking questions that, as I do every day today, even. Many questions all day, every day. The learning curve, I think, must be incredibly steep at all times. And then projects that are exciting to you, which is my third goal I'll get to. Obviously, salary, benefits, diversity, and inclusive environment, work-life balance, all of that. But the point here is try to sample as many of these as possible at as different places as possible. And you find a place that hits every single mark to the fullest, let me know. I mean, and I say this, okay, so let's move on to the third one and talk a little bit more about offices. Work on super cool projects. After all, we should have fun, right? Cool projects are more fun. And I work at POW, Practice for Architecture and Urbanism, founded by Vishan Chakrabarty, who some of you might also know. He teaches around as well. And he was also my senior professor a semester after Mario, and he hired me pretty much right after school. One of the things that made it easy for me to choose this firm was Vishan and Pao was very clear about what they do and what they don't do. At the time, and still to this day, I'm personally not as interested, not as exciting working on single-family housing, for example. I would personally much rather work on cultural projects, institutional projects, infrastructural projects. And I knew if I worked at POW, I wouldn't be given a project that doesn't excite me as much. I made a conscious decision in that sense. And here are 4 projects that it's super cool, it's a subjective thing to say, I think are cool. And over the 6.5 years I've been at POW, not once have I worked on something that is not super cool. I have time to only go over one of them, and I will choose the one that is nearest and dearest to my heart, the top left one, which is an airport traffic control tower prototype. The client is the federal government, FAA, and it is a prototype because the idea is to apply this one single design to 100 different locations across the US to replace funding towers. This is part of the bipartisan infrastructure law. They have the funding to do so. So the FAA started a competition a couple of years ago, and I was from the beginning very fortunate to have been one of the leads from my office to be running this. And spoiler alert, we ended up winning the competition against some of the biggest firms, and Powell is a 25 people firm. So I was super excited about that. They asked, are you the next IMPay? Because the federal government back in the 60s had a similar competition for design professionals to design a prototype for the next generation towers at that time. And IMPay, as a young architect, won. And his design was this. It is a critical infrastructure. It has to be adaptable. It has to be functional, sustainable, efficient, easy to build, quick to build, easy in every possible way, easy to maintain, right? Because at the end of the day, they're going to apply it everywhere, different seismic zones, different climate zones. He said, everything you see is a result of a purely functional requirement. And that makes a lot of sense for a critical infrastructure. Our team went along a similar kind of idea. Let's have the program requirements, which is quite stringent, by the way, regulated by the government. There's a very robust mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire protection system because this tower can never stop working 365. And the structure is obviously super important because there's New York with no seismicity, but it will also be applied in California. And then we said, let's not have any added sugar to this. Let's have the architecture be what it needs to be. And flavor, yes, but added sugar, no, no bells and whistles. And our value proposition sort of looked at some of the other infrastructure that's around us, light towers, water towers, lighthouses, grain silos. These are all iconic structures that do what they have to do really, really well. They're simple, yet they're beautiful. We also looked at an R2-D2 reference because Vishaan loves Star Wars, and the government asked us to have these buildings be adaptable to different heights based on the airport requirements. And this is a rendering of the shortest possible tower. I think you can see the Star Wars in this image. No, I do. This is a physical model showing 3 different heights, although we can achieve 5, not to brag. A few images just to give you a gist of the taller towers, shorter towers. Just a shout out to our structural partners at Thornton Thomas Eddy for doing a phenomenal job with the exoskeleton, which has become kind of decided also the look and feel of the tower. Okay, I will stop now. Hope to talk about either my goals and dwell on them a little more, or goals you might have during the Q&A. Thank you for listening.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Joseph James. I want to thank the League and thank all of you for attending this. I'm a designer with ZGF Architects, and I'm also a co-director and co-founder of the design collective Partners of Place. This presentation is entitled In Service of Systems, and I'm really just going to talk about the relationship that we as designers have as members of a service industry with the systems around us. So we're born within the context of established systems. Like everyone here, I was once a little child. And so the world's obviously very complex. And I was fortunate to have 2 parents that allowed me to understand that relatively early, that it's okay to not necessarily understand everything around you. My mom was a flight attendant who then transitioned into flight services, and she worked on domestic and international flights. And so obviously the world was made larger from day one from that standpoint. And then my father was an economic developer and actually retired when I was around 10 after about 30 plus years serving as an economic developer. And so from day one, I kind of understood that there's a diversity of people, there's a diversity of contexts that we all live in, and it's okay to not necessarily understand everything about them, but to be curious about them. So we operate within systems that are more complex than our perception. And as students, I think that's something that you kind of want to lean into and understand that part of what you're doing as a designer is starting to take a direct step into trying to understand that dynamic. And so I think probably most of you have had a conversation with someone outside of architecture that says, okay, well, what do you do? And they probably lean either on the formal function of what you do or kind of the aesthetics of what you do. And obviously we do both of those things. But that's kind of what drove my work early on as a designer in school. I'm going to show a couple of school projects really quickly. I really wanted to make sure that I spent time thinking about what a building system is in and of itself, but then also what can we do to make architecture fun and social and engaging for people. And that was the easiest way to speak with both designers and non-designers in the work that I was doing. Obviously, not obviously, but additionally, I didn't really know architects growing up. And so I was always kind of nervous about the more technical side. And so I really dealt with the dualities within design by making sure that I was working while also in school. And that's part of the reason I wanted to be in a city for grad school. So we can work in service of the systems that we identify. That in large part is what we do as architects and designers. We have to be considerate of the various systems at play, whether they be building systems in terms of mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems to the social kind of systems around us and factors that influence how projects come to be. This is a project entitled One U City and One U City Square in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It is located just a block off of Market Street, which is kind of the main drag in West Philly. And the client wanted the program for the building is both lab and office space. But the client wanted something that could put the life sciences on display. And so the square is really important to developing and building out the characteristics of this program. Obviously, we're dealing with basic building principles as far as facade systems. Dealing with our design really came out of wanting to make this a really social environment. And so the ground floor is really what we were focused on and how that bled into the square itself and made this space more accessible to the community. Obviously, in West Philly, you have UPenn, Temple, Drexel, all right in that area. And so with students needing places to work, this was an opportunity for people to come together and discuss the business of the life sciences. Additionally, additionally, with any type of building, you're thinking about also just the programmatic component of it. And with this being a square, we needed to kind of think, with this being the first building on the square, we had to actually think about things that didn't yet exist and the potential for growth over time. And so it's a smaller kind of bit of this, but one of the things that I really found a lot of pleasure in was thinking about just the logistics of once multiple buildings are going to be situated here, how do we kind of grow and develop this site over time? So we can, I'm going to bring up two ideas now. So we can question our service to systems, but we can also question what our systems are in service of. And this is really what I want to focus on. So in addition to working at ZGF, I also co-chair our diversity and inclusion advocacy group, also known as NIAG. And what we're really interested in, and one of the things I'm really interested in, is making sure that this conversation does not just exist in kind of an affinity field, but it's actually integrated into the processes of building, the processes of community, and the process of design. And so there are about 15 of us that meet about every other week. We run certain programs, but what we're really trying to do is document how does the question of Jedi work, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion actually integrate itself into the practices and the principles that we take into our design work, as well as making sure that as a community of designers, a community within our individual offices, we're fostering the environment that is going to produce the best outcomes. One of the things that I was really excited about developing while working in this capacity was this thing that we call the contextual matrix, and it really analyzes a variety of things from a micro to macro level. So we're thinking about the industry as a whole. We're thinking about our relationships interpersonally. We're thinking about our design work as an office and the design field more broadly. And we're able to kind of work through a number of different ideas and strategies. And what this has been really great for is it documents it over time. Obviously, people come and go. And so you really want to make sure that you have some type of index of these types of conversations that you can refer back to. Outside of ZGF, as I said, I'm a co-director of a design collective called Partners of Place. And so these are my co-directors. And we're actually operating out of 5 different cities. We know each other from a collection of undergrad and grad school. Love these guys, they're all great, fantastic people. And we were fortunate to be recipients of, or one of the 6 recipients of this year's 2024 League Prize. And I'm going to just run through a few projects that, again, re-examine our relationship with our design service and the systems at play. So the first, in a lot of ways, may not be your traditional understanding of like what design is. We were really interested in kind of the role that sociology, economics, and history kind of play in the context of the built environment. And so in 2020, amid 2020 and everything that was going on, we wanted to do something that wasn't quite as direct action as maybe protesting, but that really started to index some of the issues that African-American communities were dealing with. And so this is one of my favorite posts about the relationship with rural land and Black communities, obviously thinking about Africans at the time being brought to the Americas and their relationship with agricultural land, and now understanding that Black Americans own less than 1% of rural land. That's a very radical shift. And so actually documenting both the cultural and political factors at play was really important for us to do. And also giving a clearer understanding of kind of those dynamics at play currently. And so what was really beautiful about this project, our account was to the far left, was that we would develop these really quick infographics that were really easy to kind of move through. And while, maybe we got, 50 to 100 likes on our stuff, we would have others find these posts and then reshare them. And so, for instance, the Black Farmer Box reposted this particular one discussing the relationship of rural Black communities and agriculture, and received 4 or 5 times the traction that we originally had. And so it created a really interesting dialogue between people who were in design and outside of design. We wanted to also provide qualitative and quantitative kind of analysis of this. So in addition to the account that we had, we also held conversations with people within the design field. So you can see Samantha Josephat there, and people outside of the design field. One of my favorite conversations was with Dr. Linda Bell, who is the state epidemiologist for South Carolina. We were able to speak with her about a number of interesting health factors at play during 2020 outside of just COVID. And so, yeah, these conversations were just fantastic to have. And I would encourage you all to maybe take a listen to some of them. And as we continue to work, our work gained traction in a number of different fields. And that was a really beautiful thing to see. And we found that to be a true success of this. I'm going to run through 2 quick projects now. I'll go really quickly. So the first is the Houston House Music Museum and AIDS Memorial. And this project was really focused on looking at how can we tell a story through design and the built environment that's both that both advocates for communities and teaches people about the histories of communities, right? So this project was particularly focused on the relationship that Black communities have with highway infrastructure and interstate infrastructure, particularly the design of it in the mid-19th century. And so it was a house music venue as well as a museum. But interlaced within that is a story of kind of socioeconomic outcomes and health outcomes for Black and queer communities that were disproportionately disadvantaged. And so in any of our work, you're going to see an overlap of design work, history, and a little sprinkle in of politics as well. And so here you can kind of see the stratification of Houston along racial lines. And so we wanted to be able to tell this story of the intersections of queer communities and Black communities within East Houston. And we did so along tangential storylines as well as chronologically, and highlighted some of the things at play when meeting at these intersections that aren't traditionally experienced. Again, a lot of our work still goes into the research and dynamics at play. And so you can kind of see some of the dynamics of some of the dynamics of highway infrastructure. Additionally, this was at a time when I don't know if you all remember, but there was a conversation on what is defined as infrastructure going on in 2020 and 2021. And so a lot of maybe the more social components of infrastructure were being disregarded by certain folks, while others realized that these two things had to run in parallel. And we were really interested in this idea of infrastructure and the occupancy of infrastructure serving as an opportunity for advocacy, from very direct action in terms of protest to the more passive relationships that we see with marginalized communities and things like public transit. And so it turned into a really beautiful project, I think. One of the things that we tried to leverage was AI as a means of actually showing a diverse group of people, not so much for just pure aesthetics of rendering. And so we were able to kind of leverage that, and we were really excited with the outcome for that. The last thing I'm going to share is a project called Patchwork, and this dealt with rural communities in South Carolina, while also telling a story about migration patterns of African-American communities, from forced migration to the hopes for a brighter future, and now remigration back down to the South. We developed a series of patches or rural patches that were ideas for reinvestment as Black communities that had migrated during the Great Migration were now starting to come back to the South and find community. And as you can kind of see, some of the work that I was showing in the United Immense Project circles back and dovetails into this work. So this is some of the imagery from that project. And so I just want to end by saying that really evaluate the system that you're a part of and that you can provide a service to in your work. I think that's really been something that's defined how I want to work and how I plan to work moving forward in the future. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Sorry. Hi, everyone. Good morning. It's great to be here. Thank you to the League for inviting me and for the other panelists for sharing your stories. I'm so you guys ran out of time, and I'm excited to learn more later. I'm Sheila. I'm a current project director at the New York City Economic Development Corporation. Sometimes when I share this with other architects, the reaction is like, what? And I often have to really explain, the organization and my role and how I ended up here. For me, that's really telling of how limited the career paths for architects can appear to be. And I remember when I was a grad student, there was always this sort of pressure to have like a specific thing, like a driving principle that will ultimately guide your own practice. And I really wanted to find that thing, but I didn't. But at this point, in retrospect, I'm grateful that having more fluid curiosities allowed me to explore different interests, exercise different skills, and ultimately land in a place that feels good. So I'll start from the beginning and trace a quick trajectory of the positions I've taken over the years. I grew up in the East Bay area of, oh no, my slides. I grew up in the East Bay area in California and also went to undergrad close to home at UC Berkeley. Around that time, the Silicon Valley tech scene was really taking off, and I felt like all over the Bay, firms were working with or on startups. I was always kind of a Luddite, never really into new technology, so I kind of knew I had to get out. As an undergrad, I was on the architecture track, but I was also minoring in city planning and urbanism in developing countries. And so I was really interested in planning alternatives outside of the US, as well as critical regionalism, cultural preservation, et cetera. So I had an opportunity to work at a firm called Neri & Hu Design and Research Office in Shanghai. And this was exactly 10 years ago. At that time, I had no idea how to plan for my career. I didn't know any architects. At school, I was just kind of bouncing around. So someone offered me a job and I was like, all right, I guess I have to move to Shanghai where I don't know anybody. But luckily, I was surrounded by great mentorship there and great inspiration from the city. And ultimately that encouraged me to pursue grad school after. The first project of my career is still one I think about more than others. It was a flagship Starbucks store, which sounds boring, I know, but the site itself was a historic Shikumen Lane house, which is a typology similar to tenement housing, which became widespread in Shanghai in the early 1900s, when a lot of migrant populations were fleeing to British and French concessions. Both in and out of work, I was really interested in salvaging the stories of what these houses have witnessed over centuries. And I love learning about how when the streets outside became hostile, these lane houses or the home and less obvious spaces became these sort of forums for communal intimacy and stand-ins for public exchange. And the successful creation of these spaces, especially when considering more modern forms of displacement, gentrification, or other changes in the city, have largely been what is my metric for good architecture. I went on to grad school at Princeton, which afforded me many opportunities to travel and see new forms of development. Through a research grant exploring the architecture of political displacement, I spent time in Turkey, Palestine, and a month in Greece, moving between UN refugee camps, squatter spaces, and city buildings, and in more established migrant neighborhoods on the outskirts of Athens. I sought to integrate this research into my thesis project and ultimately proposed a model for a network of housing and storefronts that would allow economic exchange between people in transient stages of residency. I think I was onto something, but the outcome was pretty disappointing. And I left grad school being kind of devastated that knowing that a lot of the work I was interested in, I felt like could never really come into existence in late capitalism. So no, I ultimately was exposed to a lot of my knowledge gaps, largely where is the money coming from, who invests in a building, constructs it, and maintains it. So after grad school, I was committed to learning about the business of architecture to better understand how things in the real world can really get built. I was also committed to becoming a more skillful designer since I felt like a lot of my time had been spent in the pursuit of academia rather than practice. I went on to work at Liang and then Ajay Associates for about 3 years. Both firms I had loved the work of for a long time and resonated with my values of community impact, contemporary art, and social advocacy. And at Liang, I was given the opportunity to be involved in the inner workings of a small design practice, to engage in the early formation of partnerships with clients, and really benefited from wearing a lot of hats. At Ajay Associates, it was like being back in school again, working with some of the most talented people I had ever met and really getting to develop my craft. I learned a lot about design, materiality, and how to really deliver or advocate for a project, especially that in the public realm. Sometimes I hear from architecture students who are eager to make a transition away from practice very quickly. And I hate sounding so, old school in this, in what I'm saying, but I always encourage people to really put in your years at a firm. I think that time was so valuable to me and frankly, irreplaceable. But that being said, I was very tired and I still had this thirst to work on projects with a bigger catchment area. And that really served everyday people in the city and not just those of a particular race, class, and age. During the pandemic, I got involved in some mutual aid work in my neighborhood. And I met some people who were working in the public sector. And it was cool to see that the things I was doing in my free time, like going to community board meetings, people were doing as a part of their actual jobs. So I learned about this nonprofit, the Urban Design Forum, which the League has a lot of partnerships with, and learn about their annual professional fellowship, which had a 2020 theme of being centered on expanding worker cooperatives and advancing minority-owned businesses. I applied and became one of 26 in the cohort. In the first part of the fellowship, we partnered with the New York City Mayor's Office of Minority and Women-Owned Business Enterprises, colloquially known as MWBEs in the city. We worked to research strategies for advancing MWBEs in energy efficiency retrofit sector. And in the second part, we partnered with a local organization in Bushwick and provided them with support in growing a cooperative model. Overall, this fellowship gave me exposure to a much larger network of people in the city and opportunities to take the leap and pivot my career. I'm still very involved with the Urban Design Forum, so when all of you are working in New York, please reach out to me. I'm always recruiting. I've now been at the Economic Development Corporation for a little over 2 years. And to give some context on what the EDC does, we are a quasi-agency, which means not an actual city agency, but we manage city land and about 60 million square feet of it. In the Capital Department, where both myself and Sean work, we manage the design and construction of capital projects on behalf of a city partner or agency. And I'll give some examples in a few. So all of us in the department have multiple projects like buildings, waterfront parks, critical infrastructure, or open spaces, and they're all at different phases of the project. In the design phase, we conduct procurement, closely oversee consultant contract terms, work with architect, engineer, and other stakeholders, budget costs, project schedules, and help with regulatory submissions with groups like Con Ed, Department of Transportation, and applications for Public Design Forum, Public Design Commission and landmarks. All things that are, sometimes feel very unglamorous, but they are all the different parts of a city that really keep it together. You won't believe how much time is spent thinking about permits and how to really obtain them. In the construction phase, we act as a liaison between the city, partner agencies, and external stakeholders. And we guide the team through scope management, existing conditions assessments, cost estimating, budgeting, and procurement of trades. It's one of those jobs where there's always something to attend to on different projects, which is generally how project management looks. And it's very different from working in a design firm where sometimes you're just spending too much time focused on one single project. But this is almost the opposite where, there's always something keeping you occupied. So no 2 days are the same. So my current portfolio includes a high school in the design phase, and 2 libraries, 2 parks, and a museum in the construction phase. This is the New York Public Library's Port Richmond branch in Staten Island, where we're working with Canon Design and Gilbane on behalf of the New York Public Libraries. It's a renovation of a 116-year-old building, including the restoration of a very old wood and brick facade. Upgrades of dedicated areas for children's, teens, and adults, and the installation of a new elevator and ADA accessible ramp. One of the exciting things about this project for me was the artwork component, in which the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs procured an artist that does a lot of community engagement work. And the artist, Greta McLean, held a few paint parties with the local senior center and elementary schools, and really had the people in the neighborhood participate as part of the mural process. And I think it's, throughout my years as architect, you're always doing this community engagement. And I thought this was a great example of just how it actually happens. This is the Brooklyn Public Library's Red Hook branch in Brooklyn, where we're working with Levin Betts and Armand on behalf of Brooklyn Public Library. It's a renovation that expands both the interior and exterior public spaces while adding important flood protections, as Red Hook is unfortunately one of the neighborhoods in New York City with the greatest risks of flooding in the next 30 years. And all over the city, we're working on flood protections of existing buildings. This is an example of a project that has really adjusted my notion of public space. I think in years before, I really thought of it as, a space where people kind of come together and gather. But I've also been learning to understand it as a community amenity. The site is next to a few NYCHA buildings with many residents who use the space for internet or air conditioning or the library's after-school programs. And it's one of the reasons at EDC, besides staying on the city's budget, we push so hard to keep construction schedules moving because a lot of these spaces are so important for people who live there. And, especially in a city that's always under construction, it's exciting to see that end in certain moments. This is the Bronx Museum of the Arts on Grand Concourse, where we're working with Marvel Architects and Consigli on behalf of the Department of Cultural Affairs. It's a renovation of just the south wing of the museum with a primary goal of unifying the multiple buildings of the museum into a single experience and making it a recognizable public landmark. And finally, I'll share Abolitionist Place, formerly known as Willoughby Square Open Space, which is the first project I've had the honor of bringing to completion at EDC. We worked with Hargraves Jones Landscape Architects and Lero Engineers on behalf of the Downtown Brooklyn Partnership. And this was a long-awaited project that started with a redevelopment plan in 2004 and pays homage to the abolitionist movement's history in central Brooklyn. It has been open to the public since May, and you should all go check it out. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So my name is Sean Yang. I also work at the EDC along with Sheila. And my talk is, I have no idea what I'm doing, but that's okay because no one else does either, I think. And I promise you there's an optimistic message in here. As Sheila mentioned, I'm also a project director at EDC. Thanks, Sheila, for going over the nuts and bolts of what we do. So I'm not going to talk about that. But just as a summary, I've worked on a series of projects at my time there. I've been there for about a year and a half. and I'm currently actively managing about $1.1 billion in projects. A little bit different than like at an architecture firm, when you're managing a project, you have like a partner breathing down your neck. Here, it's kind of like, this is your project, get it done. And I really appreciate this opportunity from the Architecture League to talk to you guys, because it gave me an opportunity to kind of consolidate some of the self-reflection I was already doing. I just turned 30 this year, and it's kind of true what they say, 30 hurties. I'm feeling a lot of like random joint pain. I got my back. So recently I've been trying to get more fit. And this year I'm running the New York City Marathon. I've started running. And if you guys know anything about marathon training, I'm in this phase right now where like on the weekends I'm running 15 to 20 miles, and it's just a lot of time to think by yourself, and it sucks, as evident of my facial expression there. And I spent one of these runs thinking about what the heck can I talk to you guys that could be, remotely useful. And it's kind of tricky because I feel like so much of my personal experience has been very unique to my circumstance, my constraints, kind of similar to what Kutay was talking about. So just like him, I'm just going to walk you through the decisions I made and some of the tools I used to make those decisions, and also just reveal some of the context and I went to undergrad at the University of Waterloo. Before that, I was born in China, also lived for about a decade in Singapore. The unique thing about Waterloo in Canada is that they have a co-op program where you're forced to work 24 months before you graduate. It's about 5 internships. And it's here that I had a lot of opportunities to test things out. And so one of the things I picked up from Waterloo is this idea of prototyping your life. So anytime I'm about to make a really big decision, what city do I want to, live in for the rest of my life, or what career I want to go to, I found it's just easier to test it out. Just like how we iterate on design before we focus in on direction, I feel like we should do that for the biggest decisions in our life. So an example for me was at the beginning of undergrad, we had like a computational design conference, and I was like, wow, this is so cool. I love the research data side. This is definitely what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. So I applied for an internship at Karen Timberlake's research group under Billy Faircloth. And I spent a lot of time. I did all the research. I made sensors. It was really fun and an amazing team. I learned so much. And most importantly, that I did not want to do this for the rest of my life. I realized that I was actually interested in zooming out, thinking about how we can actually apply technology and research to an urban scale to develop solutions, rather than being the one innovating, coding, reading really boring research papers. So I spent 4 months, and it saved me 4 years, wasting 4 years of my architecture school, focusing on something I didn't care about, or I didn't want to pursue for the rest of my life. So this trial and error approach helped me avoid, I think, following a career path and try to find work that actually suited me. I think the worst thing to happen is you're in your 40s, you realize you hate your job, and it's too late, right? And I've done this repeatedly for many decisions throughout my life. After Waterloo, I went to grad school to get my master's. I went to Yale. I wanted to continue this trajectory of just expanding the breadth of my knowledge. I think very similar to Sheila. I was interested in creating better cities. And throughout these 2 years of working during my undergrad, I realized if I wanted to actually have an impact on cities, I needed to be more than a designer. I needed to understand business, real estate, law, politics. And Yale was the school that allowed me to expand horizontally, and because it's really easy to take classes outside of architecture school at Yale. And I also wanted to study under Pierre Vittorio. So after graduating from Yale, I was like, okay, I've learned all these cool things from the law school, business school. I'm gonna take a non-traditional route in my career, right? And then do something super cool and unique that no one's done before. But however, to quote the great Mike Tyson, Everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face, and life is really good at punching you in the face. Again, I think similar to Kutay, I'm a alien in America. So upon graduating from Yale, I had 90 days to find a job in the industry before I got deported. So even though I wanted to pursue a non-traditional career path right out the gate, in the back pocket, I knew I had to apply to some like architecture firms so I could stay in the country. And so I was looking really hard, trying to find opportunities in development, real estate. But as you can see, this is not 2001 when I graduated was a very bad time for commercial real estate. Most firms were dealing with stalled projects. There was just no financing available for new projects in the city. And so the big lesson for me that I learned here was that I actually have a lot less control over my career than I thought. I thought if you worked hard, you could get these opportunities, but sometimes they're just larger forces at play that are just completely beyond your control. And in this case is, COVID and the macroeconomic forces. And what was important for me is just accept reality and then adapt to it. So I think I waited until 2 weeks before I got deported before finally accepting an offer at an architecture office. It's kind of chilly in here. I went to Harrington Architects and, I accepted, I'm going to work here for next year. How do I make the most out of it? So I focused on getting my license because I knew I was never going to work in an architecture office again. And then I also really took the time to just focus and learn some of the basic fundamentals of architecture that you don't learn in school. How do you put together a drawing set? How do you detail? What is a spec book? How do you invoice? How does the business financials run? And I think like Sheila, I really value that opportunity to do that because sometimes as you go further down your career, it's really hard to go back and learn the fundamental things. And I think looking back during that period of my life, I beat myself up a lot. I thought it was my own failure that I couldn't get the job I wanted. But I realized, I wish I'd just gone a little bit easier on myself because there wasn't much I can do, especially now when I see how markets affect careers. So I think for all of you, the economy is kind of shaky right now. Who knows how, don't take it to, it's not all up to you. And I think it's really important to be adaptable. So this is where I kind of want to turn the slides off for now. I want to talk about my experience with change. I kind of just wanted to talk to you guys face to face because this was a point in my life where I knew I wanted to leave traditional architecture. And I knew I wanted to zoom out and actually have an impact on how we build cities. But despite knowing all of that, doing my due diligence, spending a lot of time networking, it was still such a scary decision to make. And I want to talk about that fear because I feel like we don't talk about it enough in architecture. And my experience with change has just always been just like dread and anxiety. And I think just changing course and doing anything different is always going to be scary. When I was doing my outreach to people outside of architecture, it was a really frightening experience. I had these voices at the back of my head on people you're going to think you have no idea what you're talking about. You don't have the experience, you're wasting their time. And so I spent actually about a year doing research. I feel like Sheila, it was great that you found that avenue. I just spent a year talking to people, finding leads. And it was like a year living with anxiety of, sleepless nights, loss of appetite. It just sucked. But I was able to move through this feeling of fear for I think two primary reasons. The first is that this process of just being really scared is weirdly familiar to me. I've experienced it before and when I was making a big decision. And I've learned that I always need to move towards fear and trust the process that there's something better on the other side. An example of this is when I was at Yale. I think I was the first architecture student in a decade to enroll in the law school. And when I emailed the law school professor to start the property law stream, he responded, yeah, you can come to my class, but I'm only gonna let you in if you can keep up. And so that was like really nerve-wracking start, right? And then I go to class, and I realized, wait a freaking second. These guys are all students too. They're not lawyers. They're learning just like me, and I'm really good at learning. So, and I think that's what deliberate change is about, to move towards resistance. And the second thing that helped me tremendously is to just have people around you who care about you and believe in you. And for me, I think one of the most important persons during that time was my partner. And there's also another group of people, let's call them believers. They're people like I really respect and weirdly believed in me before I believed in myself. And despite there being no evidence for them to believe in you. So it's like a really funny situation. And I had the luck of having this with Lyndon Neri after just one conversation with him. He gave me tremendous support. I took studios with Pierre Vittorio, Todd Williams, Billy Tien, and they saw something in me that I did not. And I don't know how much their words mean to them, but for me, it had so much mileage, that their vote of confidence took me much further than, because I didn't have confidence in myself at that time. So oops, sorry. And the shitty thing is, this fear never goes away. Every time I start something new, it's so scary. I think Zoe and Anne have asked me to talk a little bit about why I'm taking like masters in real estate at NYU part-time. And honestly, it's because I've been afraid to start my own development project. And I started taking classes last year. And after starting taking classes, I realized, wait a second, I've done this at SLM. I already have all the tools to do my own projects. I've just been scared to start. So that's what I've done this year. Not moonlighting, just on the off hours, I've been, I've raised some funding from what they call FFNF, Family, Friends, and Fools, to do a small 3 to 4 unit multifamily project in the tri-state area. And I am fresh in that fear phase right now. I feel like I have no idea what I'm doing. I now have responsibilities to people with relationships I care about, and I'm scared of letting them down. But I know the only thing I can do is move forward. And I think what's important to note is that everyone I've had the opportunity to see up close innovate, I've realized deal with this same fear. And to me, I think honestly, I see you guys as peers. I graduated from grad school 3 years ago, so I'm literally one step out the door compared to you guys. We're going to be working in the industry together. And I want to end this by saying, I think the industry is really ripe for change. We're at a very unique point in time where we have so much public interest in what we do. I think urban problems, spatial problems are now societal problems. Housing, transit, urbanism is at the forefront of everyone's mind. We also have new technologies coming online that's making it easier for smaller practitioners to design faster, build faster. I use AI every day. We have new manufacturing techniques coming online, and I can see the money that New York City is putting into startups in the built environment. And I think most importantly, I think we have a generation of people now, and I'm looking at, you, me, all the panelists up here, who are a lot more open-minded to thinking creatively about how we can actually, impact the built environment outside of the traditional path. So I really believe that our generation has the opportunity to change and reshape how we build the world around us. But the crappy thing is, it's going to take all of us working together, or the challenging thing is, it's going to take all of us working together experimenting, and ultimately failing. And that's gonna be hard but there's two types of failure. I think the first comes from never trying to get your ideas out there, never taking that first step because you're succumbing to that fear, or you're waiting for that perfect opportunity. And that's the type of failure you will never learn from, and it will destroy you from inside out. The second kind of failure comes from you taking a leap of faith, taking a stab at something in the dark. And you're gonna fail there too. And it's gonna be embarrassing, it's gonna hurt, you're gonna get your reputation damaged. But I think what you learn far outweighs what you lose. Because through that pain you'll learn the stepping stone to actually creating meaningful change in our world. And honestly, I want to be part of that journey with our generation, with you guys. I want to be part of a generation that innovates, which is why I'm telling you guys how freaking scared I am all the time. Because we're all going to have to move towards that fear together. And that's the only way that we can actually create the change that we want to see in the world. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to invite all of the panelists up for our Q&A, which will be moderated by Anne Rieselbach. I want to take this opportunity to remind all of you in the room to think of some questions, because you can ask questions during the Q&A. I will have a mic. I will bring it to you. If you're in the overflow room, you can come in and ask your question. And if you're online, you can type it in the chat and we will ask that question on your behalf as well.
Do you want to quickly tell people then what's next to how they have their marching?
Right. And also, while we are transitioning, I'm going to tell you about what's happening next so you can prepare. Please keep your attention on the panel discussion, but just to forecast, we're going to talk for around 30 minutes here. And then we're going to transition out of the morning session and towards the afternoon session. So you should have all received an email this morning at 9 a.m. with your studio visit assignment. If you did not receive that email, do not panic. We have all of your names and all of your assignments, so you can go see Damasi, who will be seated in the central area on the couch. And he has a list of all of your studio assignments, so not to worry, but you all should receive those. Everyone has been matched with the studio that they ranked as one of their top 3 selections. All of the studio tours will be fantastic. There is no switching. All the building security has the list, and you will not be admitted into a studio tour that is not your assignment. So please keep that in mind. Again, every single tour is going to be wonderful. We have about an hour for a 45-minute allowance for you to get to those tours. They're all in different places. One of them is in Brooklyn. None of them should take over 30 minutes for you to get to by subway. And there will be a volunteer, a faculty representative, or a member of the league staff who will also be traveling with you to those locations. You're free to go on your own, but if you aren't feeling super confident about navigating the subway system, you can stick with them. And they'll be meeting up with you around in the lobby underneath the names of the firm tours that are on the walls. During this hour, we would invite you to grab some lunch on your way or get a bagel if you haven't already. Get some coffee, load up, and please try to arrive at your assigned studio at 12:50. The studio tours will begin around 1. They'll last until 2:30, and then we'll all meet up again at 3 p.m. at Kutay Architects, which is right near Bryant Park. If you have questions, please come find me. Talk to Damasi. You can also talk to Anne, Jacob, Billy, Bob. You know our faces by now. Please don't hesitate to reach out. And if you're online, you can email me at fruchter@archleague.org. All right. With that, I think we can go for the panel.
And there will be some food, I guess I could say this in the microphone, at the last stop. There'll be a reception of box and wonderful terraces to look out over the city. So pray for sunshine.
Okay.
And I'm going to ask very few questions because I know you all have a lot, but I did ask even before I'm going to ask one question and then I'm going to let the panel continue to think, but I'd ask them to start thinking of questions they would have for each other, which is what I'm hoping for. But before we start, and here's a whole bunch of current students, and looking through your resumes, you've all taken parallel tracks in school. You've done extracurricular activities. You've sometimes studied law, done things like that. What didn't you do you wish you did when you were in school? Sheila, why don't we start with you? And you need to use the microphone.
What do I wish I had done? I think, and I said in my presentation, I wish I had focused more on developing a practice or found more of my place in design. I think I'm answering this question circuitously because throughout Joseph's presentation, I was like, damn, I think you're doing all the things I thought I could do, but I never found a way. So I really want to hear from you on how you're able to kind of manifest that. I generally just don't have regrets though, not because I feel confidence in my decisions, but I feel like I did everything I do everything I can do every day, and I can't do more than this, so.
Oh, sure. I don't know which mic. I think there was a period where I actually really regretted going to do a master's of architecture, especially when, I took all these other courses outside of architecture. I was like, I'm learning so much more, but I think it's too late for regret now. But one thing I wish I had treated more seriously when I was at Yale, my partner and I, Nicole, we won the Startup Accelerator at Yale. And I wish I took that project more seriously. It just became kind of a side thing that, I'll do this while I'm at Yale, but I didn't treat it seriously enough that this could become a business. And I kind of feel like I'm going back to that and doing that now without the ecosystem that Yale provided.
I think looking back, one thing I did was taking courses that I thought I would be good at, not the courses that I think I need the most, because I wanted to, I guess, be good and score higher. And I was really, ambitious, less and less so as I age, I think, in a good way. In a good way, I think there's toxic ambition and then there's healthy ambition. I think it is toxic to choose things that you'll be good at. To Sean's point about being horizontal, I call that, and many people do, the Swiss Army knife. You can't cut a tree with a Swiss Army knife, but you can do many different things, although you may not excel at a certain thing. I think it would be, and I strive for this every day now, to become more of a Swiss Army knife, although it's a huge task. So I know I can lead one day knowing where to look, what to look for, who to ask, because information is out there. I don't know every single thing, but getting that horizontality in your mindset is important.
To piggyback off of the idea of horizontality, I think just the nature of architecture school, it can be really insular. And I think one of the things that I would have liked to have done, and I had a grad school professor who kind of put it very bluntly, to say that architects don't make enough money for you to only have a circle of architects. And what really, I think what he was trying to point out was that, when you're in school, you're in a really unique space and opportunity to meet a bunch of really diversely interested people that are doing all types of really amazing work in whatever their path is. And I think learning and interacting with those people more and more is really valuable to what we do as we matriculate and advance through our careers. And so I wish I had maybe taken a little bit more time to really just have a little bit more curiosity about some of the other things that were happening on campus, and really just getting to know more people outside of just my architecture bubble.
You just led into my second question, and then I'm going to stop and let you ask each other. And I know from going through your CVs that even when you were in school, most of you took on some other tracks or other extracurricular activities, things that, to my mind, looking and listening to you today, planted the seeds for some of the things you're doing now. You were talking about diversity and the effort you're leading at ZGF at Clemson. And so back then, what did you all do that wasn't in the curriculum? But I know some journalism, things like that.
Guess what? Do you want
No, you can start because this carries through. We'll go this way.
I don't know how many of you are familiar with NOMA. The first chapter of NOMAS at Clemson was actually started by one of the guys in my cohort, Julian Owens, and I really want to applaud him more so than myself right now, understanding the importance of advocating for space for, in particular, Black designers, but more broadly, minority designers and designers with less play and voice at the table. I think that that work I didn't fully necessarily appreciate until I started to work in the profession. Even at the time when I was at Clemson in undergrad, I think there were 4 Black architecture students in my class to begin our freshman year out of almost 160 people that were there. So obviously, in a state like South Carolina, that's almost 30% Black. Like obviously, those numbers tell a lot about kind of the nature of who's working in the built environment and their role. And so I think more and more throughout my career path, I've really leaned on trying to make sure that I'm advocating for space and representation within the field, not just showing up, but actually having the ability to articulate what it is that is unique about your own circumstances and what it is that your background brings to the table to influence how you see the world and how you design within the world.
Just to clarify the question, is it the separate tracks that we take?
Well, actually, what you, as students, and how that perhaps extrapolates into some of the things you're doing now.
Well, outside of architecture. Or not.
It could have, it doesn't have to be totally outside of architecture.
Okay.
Things that weren't in the curriculum
Got it.
that you took on.
Got it. Okay. I took a class at GSAP that was called GAP 3, led by Michael Rock, which I thought it was really not too much about architecture at all. It was much more about storytelling and narrative and conveying ideas. We watched films for assignments, and then we talked about, those films, and in fact made recordings ourselves coming to the school and narrating our, journey to the school, stuff like that. I didn't learn much about architecture from that school, from that course, and that was kind of the intent that, like I said during the presentation, I do like to approach from different design paths and then use that information and design sensibility in my work as much as I can. So that could be one thing that I did during school that I try to keep implementing when I think about an assignment, because the assignment can become very, if you look at it that way, it's like, okay, let's get it done by 6 p.m., let's leave. You can work to get paid. That's one way, or you can work to add value in different ways that you have developed over the years.
I'm stacking the deck on you too, because I know you were involved with the legal services group when you were at Yale, and Sheila, I know you were involved with Women in Architecture and with Pigeon, and I was wondering if each of you could talk about those briefly, and then each of you choose a question to ask each other, and we'll open it up to you all to have a free flow.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like going outside of architecture was very just innate in me, because I have two, I think, what people would typically think of as very negative traits. I'm very impatient and I have a very short attention span. I almost have the opposite problem of you, where when I feel like I've understood something, I get so bored of it. And I need, like, learning is almost addictive. And it was actually Todd and Billy during their studio. Todd said to me, "Sean, you're too freaking impatient to be an architect." But he also said some of the most important and powerful people he'd met shared that same trait. And he said, you should go out and try to change the world instead. And I had a few of these professors that just really pushed me to go out of my comfort zone and to take the legal clinic. That started from, I took the property law stream and I was like, this is actually exactly the same stuff PV is right, Pierre Vittorio is writing about, but just in the black text law book. It's not that, it's much easier for an architect to learn law than a lawyer to learn how to read a plan. And I really enjoy exploring new domains of knowledge. It's like, it's almost like crack. It's so exciting for me that I do crack.
Grad school, I wouldn't, I don't recommend this to people, but I did as little architecture curriculum as I could get away with. I took courses in comparative literature, African-American studies, decolonial studies, and I spent my weekends trying to spend as little time as possible in Princeton. And I come to New York and be involved with, organizing and other events happening. I think my involvement with Women in Design at Princeton was really what kept me grounded and inspired something in the discipline. I think my biggest accomplishment from working with that group was organizing a conference centered around Norma Sklaric, who very important African-American female architect whose I think legacy has been largely unwritten previously, especially I would say specifically at Princeton. And it was really through that conference and, really fighting to bring in people who the school would historically not have involved in that project, and understanding that, my frustrations with architecture or my lack of engagement with it was not unique to me, but rather, a lot of us are multifaceted and would do so many things with our time if architecture curriculum was not so demanding. And I think through meeting that network of like incredible women and understanding and just being surrounded by people who were much older and further along in their careers and understanding that, you can be an architect and still be involved in all your other interests, and it could be of benefit to you and just have allow you to have more influence outside of the discipline. That's something that I really carry with me still. And, I think that was the biggest takeaway from grad school for me.
Let's open it up to you all. Someone who's going to be brave. Okay, so there and then in the front row after that, Bob.
Hi, my name's Sheila, and first I wanted to thank all of y'all. Y'all gave some amazing presentations. I think all of us appreciate everything you said. I think, Sean, your presentation really resonated with me. I'm born and raised in Singapore, and I think something I thought about a lot and maybe struggle with decision making is this idea of where I live and where I'm going to do architecture, because a lot of the places where I think about, which are like home or feel familiar, they may be not the most open or creative thinking. And then meanwhile, here in New York is such an open and fantastic place. And obviously there are positives and negatives to living here. And I was wondering for all of you, if there was ever a point where you guys, it was like a push and pull where somewhere you wanted to live, but maybe not want to work, or somewhere you want to work and not live, and did it all work out? Was that a decision you had to make? And how did you like come around to thinking about that?
I'm happy to take this one first. You actually, my question to you guys are gonna be, are you guys New Yorkers for life? And where do you wanna like, I totally feel your question. I think for me, the Waterloo Co-op program was instrumental. Through that experience, I got to live in and work in Paris, Helsinki, Rome, Philadelphia, New York, and I'm from Beijing, and I also live and grew up in Singapore. So I kind of got a feel of at least part of the globe, what life would be like. And I think America, despite everything you read in the news, has this really amazing like attitude towards the future. I feel like in America, and I've never felt this anywhere else, the sensation is the best is ahead of us and we are going to build the better future. I've never felt that anywhere, not even in Canada, which you would think is pretty culturally similar. And that's what really made me choose to come to grad school in the States. And like when I was in Rome, there was a sensation that the best is in the past. No one's gonna build over Michelangelo. And I really struggled personally with the rigid structures in China and Singapore. I was like getting called into the principal's office every day in Singapore because I'm just really bad at following rules. But I think, again, for me, I just got to prototype life in different places. I don't know if I'm gonna stay in New York forever, but the American attitude towards risk tolerance, I've never found that anything close to that anywhere else in the world.
Thank
You staying on the east from the west?
I don't have a good response to this because, I love New York City and I think like all of you, the main thing that keeps me up at night is money. Both not knowing how I can afford living here and also recognizing that so much of the work that we do as architects almost exclusively is contributing to New York City becoming less affordable.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
At this end of the table?
For a lot of different questions in there. If I could change anything, and this is kind of an indirect way of saying this, if I could change anything about the States, it would be that I think you should be able to kind of carry your political power and capital outside of where you live if it's in relationship to where you're from. And the reason I say that is because I live here, I live in New York, Brooklyn. But obviously, and I think you can see it in some of my work, so much of it reaches back to where I'm from and the communities that don't necessarily get to be platformed. And so a part of my heart inherently lies there. My dad, I think, kind of instilled that in me to a degree. He grew up, actually, we did the inverse. So he grew up in New Jersey and went to school in New York, and then found his way down to the South. And I think, again, part of that is just kind of that reconnection with roots and where extended family and things like that are from. And so I think the short answer is I don't know, but I think I want to be able to kind of exist within multiple spaces with my work, even if my physical footprint doesn't necessarily touch somewhere else.
I'm a New Yorker for life, I think. I'll watch this video in maybe 10 years and say,
I wish I
I
had that.
didn't know anything.
I wish I had that conviction. I feel like I'm still looking.
Very good.
Thank you for sharing your wonderful work and insights. You guys have been mentioning grad school a lot, and I was wondering what led to your decision to pursuing a master's degree and if you think it's necessary to the industry right now.
In Turkey, I did a 4-year undergraduate study of architecture, and while it's technically a bachelor's degree in Turkey, as opposed to, I think here it's 5 years if it's bachelor's, right? In Turkey, we don't have to take licensure exams to become an architect, which I feel is ridiculous. If you're at the end of your 4th year and you're out the door and you call yourself an architect at that point and can stamp and say that doesn't make any sense. Well, tying back to the previous question too, having spent some time in Turkey, I knew that I probably don't want to work there in architecture. Speaking to my friends now after so many years, I think that belief that I had is kind of approved that they are not quite happy with the pay, they're not happy, and with just the general respect architects get in that particular country. So I think the first thing is I knew I didn't want to stay there. If I did, I would still do a master's there, I think, to get a little more after that 4th year. But then knowing I would come to the US, even more so, I need to get my toes wet, is that the phrase? To, know people, start a network in an entirely new country on the other side of the world. So I don't just see it as taking courses, but also meeting peers like this one. And so I thought, to me, it was important also for visa purposes. To me, I had to do it. Otherwise, how do I can't just come to the US. I would go on a tourist visa, I guess. So in my case, it might be a little too specific to me, but that was my reasoning.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think there are two questions: why you chose to do masters, and would you recommend it? First question is, honestly, I feel like I didn't think about it critically enough. It was just kind of like what Sheila was saying. I feel like in architecture, there's kind of this like path that you're supposed to take, and I just took that path. All my peers just went to like the same four schools in the Northeast, and I did it without thinking, which is why I also feel like I somewhat regret doing it. Do I think you need it? Absolutely not. But that's the other thing, like when the biggest benefits I got out of grad school were not at the School of Architecture. It's the things I didn't anticipate of like meeting people at the startup center and meeting people who work in startups and meeting people at the law school and just exposing me to other ways of thinking. Could I have done another degree? Absolutely. Would I if I had the chance? Probably.
I don't think architecture school is like over. But I do think that the purview of what architecture is and what you can do in the Northeast is very limited and sort of suffocating. You know, I'm from California, and I think some of the best work I'm seeing come out of architecture schools is places like I don't know, California College of the Arts, SciArc in LA, HBCUs. And I think that sometimes in this small network of schools that we're all associated with, it can feel like here are like 3 things you can do, and here are like 10 people who are cool. And so I think I would just encourage everyone to really look beyond, you know, just your faculty or just the classes that you have, and really use this time that I think grad school is so much about having time to not go to work every day, and really just use this time to like think about what not just what you're interested in professionally, but what you stand for, what you care about, and how you can use your career to get there.
I think grad school and education in general, I think sometimes can be used to gatekeep. And I think in a lot of ways, you know, when you're younger and you're trying to just, you know, do what you perceive to be as right, those gates seem really large and scary. And you're like, well, okay, well, I've seen the most people do this. When I originally actually even got into design, I'm going to say design school because my first degree wasn't a professional degree. I wanted to do product design, sneakers in particular. And I spent, I remember like a good month convincing myself, maybe even, but definitely my parents that I could do so with an architecture degree. And then at some point, I really fell in love with what I was doing. And I think the relationship with people and not just product that came out of architecture. And so I would just encourage anyone who is trying to think about their educational direction to not be fearful of those gates, to be patient, to really speak with a number of people and be considerate about what it is that you truly want, and not just, I mean, I'm also a little bit competitive. So sometimes just someone telling me I can't do something, I'm like, I'm going to do that. Don't do that though all the time. And so, yeah, just be patient with what you're doing, and try and be as intentional as you can, and take the time to kind of speak with others about how they went through that process.
We're gonna have time for 2 more questions. Zoe's gonna take one from online, and then we have one back there. It's gonna take you about 30-ish minutes to get wherever you're going, so there's time to talk informally, but I'm gonna try to be mindful to allow everyone time to fuel up a little bit. So we'll do these 2 and try and keep the answers compact so people can talk to you each informally too.
Okay, I have a question from Osaruni from City Tech, and she asks, how do you deal with imposter syndrome? And I'll add, if you do. And how do you maintain a good work-life balance? Which actually there's a couple more questions in the chat about work-life balance. So I think a lot of people are wondering, given all that you do.
Yeah, and one of my questions besides running was, and what else? So. Okay, so we all have.
My immediate instinct is, I think if you ever meet anyone who appears to not have imposter syndrome, they're a psychopath and you should. I think I've dealt with it through, coming from not an architecture family or having resources to inform what I'm supposed to do. I've benefited from just great mentorship. Just from early on in my career, I think, I wasn't very good at design or knowing how to like navigate architecture school successfully, but I, knew how to reach out to and build community with a lot of other people who could share those experiences. And I know it's always a basic, people always tell you to network, but I really think you should form connections and find friends. And that really is the guiding principle for me of how to get through anything in life.
I think feel imposter syndrome all the time, and it's in the title of my presentation. And the breakthrough was I realized no one actually knows what they're doing. Anyone who's actually trying to innovate is just as scared. And so we're like, oh, we're just all the same, and we're just dealing with the same fear. And the second question was work-life balance. I mean, I was gonna ask you guys, how the heck do you find time to do everything you guys are doing? I really struggle, almost like I struggle with how hard I should work. I find it hard to dial it back. And there's this whole conversation about work-life balance, but sometimes I really enjoy just going all in on something, but it's also being unhealthy, right? And I'm like, wait, I don't wanna like die early. So how do I balance that? And I'm still struggling with it. I feel like I sometimes take on too much, and it's about focusing on what matters to me. Even today, I'm supposed to work on, one of my side projects in the shop today. I have a 12-mile run and I'm here. I'm like, crap. I don't think I have balance. And I don't know if that's bad or good. That's the problem. Should I have balance? People tell me I should, but I feel like maybe I don't want balance. I don't know.
I definitely want balance.
Okay.
Sound like you.
If I ever feel like my work-life balance is compromised, then I would change the ways I'm doing things. So it's not even a question of how do you balance it. If it is unbalanced, that's behind me. I think I'm pretty straight with that. And over the years that I worked at the firm that I've been working, which is 6+ years, that was never compromised to the point, except for a few deadlines here and there, that I deemed to be healthy. I didn't feel that way, hence I'm still there. I wouldn't still be there if it wasn't the case. I wouldn't bluff, I would say it. And then if that doesn't get fixed, I'm out. We deserve better. We can't just live by someone's rules just because they say you have to stay until this and that hour, even if the office is, oh, this and this office, oh, I'm at this office, I owe it to them. You don't owe anyone anything, as far as I'm concerned. As for the imposter syndrome, of course I feel it. One of the perks of working at a smaller office, let's say, as opposed to the SOM answer I gave, is that I was given a lot of responsibility beyond what I could handle at some points. And I don't even know at that point if it's a syndrome or am I just being an imposter when I'm like the person who's supposed to answer the questions and I don't know the answers. But I made peace with myself saying that I don't know, but let me get back to you. And that's always a reasonable response. And I always do get back, and in the process, I learned myself. There's nothing wrong with that.
I think, and I hope everyone feels imposter syndrome to some degree. Just the building process in and of itself is so uncertain. I'm working on a project right now that has had, I feel like 10+ renovations, and over the course of all of those renovations and the time period the building was originally constructed, the ways things were documented were completely different. So if anyone pretends that they actually know everything that's going on, they're lying. And there are a number of things I think just within this profession that create that kind of dynamic of uncertainty and being able to operate within that uncertainty. And I think relying on the community that you build, understanding that everyone has been in some type of similar condition to you where they don't know everything that's happening is one of the really most beautiful things. And I know at times it can be kind of scary to lean into that, but definitely like look for places and look for people who can be empathetic to that dynamic. As far as work-life balance, going back to like the competitive side of things, like growing up, I played a ton of sports and the way things were segmented were very much like in season, off season. And so that's, I think, how I approach a lot of what I want to do. Every year there's like something that I want to do. And I try to arrange my schedule in a way to like rev up for it. For instance, with the league prize stuff, I don't even know if I should say this, but I took off about, I hadn't been taking off enough time and I took off about 3 weeks and really had already had a plan set in place in terms of the things that we wanted to accomplish that have been going on for maybe a little less than a year. Revved up. One of the guys was living in Australia at the time, and we were literally just handing things on and off between our schedules. Where like he could work while I was asleep, I was working while he was asleep. And so part of that is just building community and being able to delegate as soon as you can with people that you trust and that see a similar vision to you. So I wouldn't say that it's all, reliant on yourself, really build that community.
I'm afraid we're going to have to, this is fascinating, and we're going to have to stop with the formal questions right now to allow time, but there is time if you want to individually, if you all can stay for another 10 or 15 minutes, ask a quick question.